everybody, Walter Crosby, your host of Sales and Cigars. My guest today is Ed Marsh. Ed does some things very similar to me. He does them in his own way. He's Ed Marsh Consulting. We've been talking. We've been friends for a while, and we kind of thought we could talk about and argue about playbooks and nomenclature around what's VPs of sales and what sales managers talk about, and maybe they don't really understand. So we had a pretty significant conversation around playbooks and what they are, how they should be created, and why the small piece that Ed and I disagree on. And then we talk about battle cards. So if you don't have any idea what a battle card is that you could use with your sales team, then go grab a cigar, grab a cocktail, strap in for another educational episode of Sales and Cigars. Thanks. Ed, thanks for taking some time to jump on the podcast today. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Walter. You've got a great lineup of guests, and I'm really flattered to have made the short list. So thank you for having me.
Oh, we look for guests that are going to add value to the audience. We want the guests to get a little exposure with their ideas, but we want to really help the audience. And those entrepreneurs, those business owners, those are the folks that that drive the economy and really take the risk. And we're trying to give them every advantage. That's why we do what we do.
Absolutely,
that's our driver. So.
And sometimes adding value involves blowing things up. Sometimes it involves tweaking them. So maybe we'll stand people's hair on end and talk about blowing something up today.
Yeah, I like blowing things up. It's a funny conversation to watch how somebody who was really enchanted with some aspect of their sales organization, and I come in and shit all over it, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" And then you walk them through it, right? Which is one of the things that we'll talk about today. We'll walk through it with them, and they realize, "Holy shit, this is awful." And then then they're in. They want to go correct. So those are the people I love. So I always start off with this question, Ed: is there a book that you reread or gift often to folks?
All right. So I don't like following the rules. So I got 3. I don't have 1. You can cut me out of the recording if you decide to, but I would say 3 books. Number 1, Fourth Turning is Here, by a guy named Neil Howe, that talks about an 80-year seculum in society, split into 4 20-year periods that really explain a lot of the the societal and political and business cycles that we see and that we experience and that we're in right now. So it does a good job breaking those out. Number 2, The Jolt Effect is a book that came out a couple of years ago from the folks that wrote Challenger Sale that I think looks at a really under recognized aspect of sales. That's these deals that are lost in no decision, where the number, I mean, most people say now it's somewhere around 40%. I think it's actually higher.
Yeah.
And really challenges the assumption that that's always a loss to the status quo. Often it's a loss to buyer indecision, where people feel so overwhelmed and salespeople are so sucky at doing their job that buyers just can't see their way clear to make the decision that they know they need to. And sellers have been trained to go back and double down on the the FUD or the FOMO or whatever you want to call it, go back to that ROI and say, well, you told me that if you didn't do it, you're going to have this problem. And as soon as you start hammering on that, the data in Jolt Effect is amazing. It shows your success rate just absolutely plummeting. So that's the second one. And the third one, which will reveal more about me than some people want to know, but I'd say the third one is Atlas Shrugged.
Ah, okay. I mean, that's I've gotten that one once or twice. I haven't gotten Jolt Effect, and that's an interesting thing, going back and looking at deals that because the status quo is so much easier for a buyer to just stay with that, right? I don't have to go upset people. I don't have to go spend money. I'll just deal with what I know, the devil I know.
And there's actually a good overlap. Many of the reasons people stick with the status quo, it's not necessarily they say, actually upon review, we're doing it the best way we possibly could. I mean, that's truly sticking with the status quo. What happens more often is all of those things you talked about, the buying committee, the decision makers that no longer seem to have the gumption to actually tell people what they're going to do, the consensus decisions, the overwhelming amount of information that people have to try to process, the fact that almost every vendor sounds identical now. I mean, I actually did a buyer persona interview for a client of mine, and this buyer took me through the way they made the decision. And in the end, the decisions were not based on the companies because he couldn't discern a difference between them. It had to do with a very small technicality about an international business aspect associated with it. And that was shocking for my client to hear because they think, well, we've got this differentiation and this technical feature and this advantage. And so all of that stuff, if you understand from the buyer perspective, I mean, there's so many reasons for them to be afraid of making a mistake because the clear path isn't necessarily clear. And so in most cases, it's not a decision to stick with the status quo. It's a fear of making the mistake.
Well, and the fear of making a mistake is really the driver if they haven't really done their homework and reviewed it. Because, like you said, if you figure out you're doing things the best way you can, okay, then you did a good review.
Right.
But most of it is that we're in a there's this sea of sameness out there.
Yep.
And salespeople try to like, oh, that guy's doing that. I'm going to try that. That works. I'm going to, be authentic, be yourself, but really get into your buyer's head and understand what's important to them. If you can't articulate what their issues are, what they face on a daily and weekly basis, then you shouldn't be calling on them.
Absolutely. And how many salespeople have that fundamental business acumen? I mean, it helps guys like you and me. We've carried P&Ls at various times. We've made business decisions, so we're probably more empathetic to what goes into that. But many salespeople do nothing to try to educate themselves about business finance, for instance. My guess is if you go to most B2B salespeople and ask them to explain the difference between accrual and cash accounting, they wouldn't be able to do it. And if you don't understand accrual accounting, how can you sell complex stuff to B2B?
But I mean, that's a piece of it. But I always believe, and I've done a whole podcast on this, that you are responsible for your own career. You are responsible for your own growth. Okay, and I believe that 100%. But at the same time, that business owner, those people, when they onboard a salesperson, they need to be giving them the questions. They need to be giving the concerns. Like if we brought somebody on from a different industry, we really need to be able to be giving them the questions, the tools, the concerns that these buyers have. So there's some responsibility from the company as well to share
Yeah, of
that.
course. Sounds
And
like you're talking about onboarding in a playbook.
well, we're just going to jump right in, right? Because what I love is I have a plan, and then it never follows the plan. We just go do what we do, especially
Well, we're
when,
not going to let salespeople tell us the same thing. We're going to expect salespeople to follow the sales process.
of course, right? Cobblers' kids have no shoes. I mean,
There you
that's
go.
that's how it works. Um, but I mean, so the thing that we were going to talk. So those books, great books, people should read them. But we got started on this idea of the jolt effect. So, um, you know, quickly, share a little bit about your journey to be doing what you're doing today.
So I went to college and decided to go into the Army after college, was an airborne infantry officer and had a blast. Of course, there's, unpleasant aspects of it, but I really,
Like jumping out of airplanes.
well, I mean, the Army has a way of taking fun out of things. Like that can be entertaining, but when you do it from 500 feet at 2 in the morning and the weather's crappy and you've got 150 pounds of gear, it kind of takes the fun out of it.
Yeah.
But when I fell in love, I got married. I didn't think I would be able to stay married, staying in the Army, so I pulled the ripcord and got out and wanted to learn business. And I figured the first thing I had to learn in business was sales. And so I took a sales job. Was really lucky that I started selling at a time. This was in 1992. I started selling at a time when companies invested in sales training. And I had a couple, my sales manager and the GM were both students of sales. The company had a culture of sales. It was founded by a former Marine who believed very much in process and training and drilling and rehearsals and all that kind of stuff. And so I didn't know any better. I got lucky in where I ended up. I didn't enjoy the industry. I was really successful. I actually sold the largest deal that the Boston location of this company had
Hmm.
when I was a snot-nosed rookie. And it was kind of you see
Young and
that
dumb.
that chart of if you don't know any better, you assume you can do it. It's only after a while that you decide it's too hard. But I stumbled into the packaging industry and um, actually stumbled into Objective Management Group at the same time. When I was looking at this packaging industry job, I was sent to Dave Curlin's office where he was sitting with a yellow pad and a pencil and took me through a sales candidate assessment before he had called it a sales candidate assessment or before he had any of the infrastructure around it. And I took the job and learned more about selling. There was good training there. There was a good environment. Um, Along the way, became sales manager, then left and bought into the U.S. subsidiary of a German company. So I was running that in the U.S., importing capital equipment. Then the currency turned against us, so I set up a company in India to take used machines to India, and essentially both companies collapsed in 2009. So the pucker factor went up pretty quick, and so I kind of stumbled my way through a couple things, and finally I said, "Screw it! I'm tired of running companies and dealing with employee complaints and whining and some of the other hassles." And I decided to become a consultant. I had never done it before, so I had to learn what to do. But that has been its own journey through export consulting and then digital marketing consulting, and then recognizing that I could help industrial companies really generate a lot of leads, but none of them sold. So then it went into sales consulting. And then it kind of evolved into this methodology that I find is analogous to the way many companies improve their manufacturing. So in manufacturing, they talk about OEE, overall equipment effectiveness, which is a way of looking at your system and identifying inefficiencies that detract from the net quality output at the end. And I think we can do the same in revenue growth. I call it ORE, overall revenue effectiveness, that treats strategy, marketing, sales, and customer success as an integrated system where we can look. I mean, on the one hand, we might be talking about close rates. On the other hand, we might be talking about click through rate based on search rankings and the number of people you bring to your website. So each of those are a component that fits together. And so that's what I do. And I do it mostly with middle market industrial manufacturers.
So, like most of us, we step in it to be doing what we're doing. We similar background in that we both got fed up with certain aspects of corporate life, um, and then we just went and did our own thing. And it's a little scary, it's a little bumpy at the beginning, but it motivates you to because you're doing what you want to do, and you're doing it the way you want to do it, which is to me a great motivator.
I would say it remains scary and remains bumpy, but that's my perspective.
Yeah, I'm not going to argue that point because any given day it's like holy crap, like I have to get that thing done before, or holy crap, I don't have anything to do, right? Um, because my wife says that like you have to go create something. I go to work and there's stuff for me to do. I'm like, yeah, but there's always something to do.
Right.
Right? And especially in sales, like you pick up the phone and you can talk to people. That there's always that. There's always a project that you can hide in, or there's always right. So
But that gives us credibility in talking to salespeople because we've got the same set of choices they do about whether to say, "Oh, we're busy working on this," or "We're going to get off our ass and prospect."
yeah, I was talking to a salesperson the other day who's transitioning from being like the front end of a sale to owning the whole cycle. And she's like, I'm too busy. And I'm like, bullshit. And she's like, well, what? And I'm like, bullshit. You have 24 hours in a day and you're working maybe five. Make the choices that are going to make you money. Well, but I have to, no, you don't have to. You have to make choices that are going to help you make money. And if you're making money, the company's making money. That's how the comp plan is set up. So
What
you're
was her
making
commitment
choices
finding?
to be busy or not.
Did you get a commitment finding on her?
Yeah, she's going to leave the company.
Hmm.
because the train has left the station,
Right.
and it's going to be fun. It's great views. Bar car on the train. We'll have a blast. But it's left the station, and
Right.
it's starting to pick up some steam. So you're going to hurt get put off. But yeah, I think it's always a little scary, and that's part of the joy. So you've, like, most of us have this diverse background, and we met each other um, not that long ago, really almost a year ago. Using the same tools from OMG, and enjoying, being out there and learning about what we do and trying new things and challenging
Right.
ourselves to get better and sharpen our saw. That's one of the things that I think kind of drew us together, is that ability to constantly look for an idea that's going to help us, right? Not get distracted, but like, what can I do to sharpen my skills? And that's part of the fun as well. So the thing that we were going to talk about, and we started to talk about, we backed out of it, is this idea of what I call like a nomenclature that CROs and VPs of sales use, and often they use it incorrectly, or they don't really understand what it means. That's just my opinion. You might differ.
No, I agree. I think every company needs a glossary. I mean, I was in a meeting last week where talk about the term lead. What is a lead? In Salesforce or in HubSpot, a lead is a specific database object,
Mhm.
which means somebody that you haven't converted to a contact yet, that's in your prospecting workflow. In most lexicon, a lead is somebody that's raised their hand at a trade show or online with a form or something that says, I'm interested, I'd like more info. But if you don't agree on what, just using that term two different ways in the same conversation, you end up, people are tied in knots trying to figure out what's going on. So I completely agree.
And then throw in a couple terms like suspect, right? Um,
Prospect,
Prospect,
deal, qualified deal, opportunity. I
MQL,
mean, all these. Yep.
MQL, SQL. So I use certain phrases and words, but I tell people this is what it means. Well,
Right.
that's not. I don't think that's what it means. Like, oh, okay, that's what it means. Now, going forward, this is the definition. You can say it's a different language, or you can say it's not what you're used to, but this is how we're going to talk about opportunities. This is how we're going to talk about buyers.
Yeah.
Um,
So I'm easier going than you. I don't care if they use my terms. I just care that everyone in the company knows what a term means and uses the same terms that mean the same thing.
Yeah, my terms are tied to process and tied to how we navigate,
Makes sense.
um, and it's just easier for Walter, quite frankly. And I can tell you, most of those salespeople, most of those sales managers and VPs of sales don't have a strong, clear, concise definition.
Absolutely.
So it's easier just to go with mine. Um, so there's a couple of them that we threw out. You pick one, I'll pick one, and then if we got time, we grab another one. I want to pick battle card,
Okay.
because that's one of the ones that you tossed out, and I'll be honest with you, I don't know what the hell that means. Um, I mean, I think I have an idea, but I have no idea, and I'm dumb enough to say, hey, I don't know. So let's talk about that. You pick one. What's the other one you want to start? You want to use?
Yeah. So, I mean, I want to talk about playbooks because you and I have kind of butted heads about this in the past.
Okay,
And I think a playbook is important. You have a different perspective. Maybe we're using a different term and maybe we
maybe.
agree on the term and suddenly we agree, or maybe there's an interesting conversation.
Well, there'll be an interesting conversation because we're talking, right? Because we have there's what I've learned is that we have a lot of stuff in common, but then there's a lot of stuff that's not, and it's
Sure.
just like this rope that all these threads tie together, and they're all going different directions, but they're all tied together,
Right.
and they work together. So playbook. Tell me when you talk about a playbook for a company, do you install a playbook? Do you give them a playbook? Do you buy a
So,
playbook? What do you do?
so I believe that we have to develop the playbook together because
Collaborate.
the playbook is an amalgamation of certain elements of the methodology, the sales process, the terminology that we're talking about, and essentially, and a number of other pieces, including battle cards and win-loss reports and deal qualification scorecards and all that kind of stuff. So the playbook ought to basically, you ought to be able to hand it to a capable sales rep and say, this will take you through from your first prospecting outreach until you've closed the deal and help you understand who our target market is, the way we sell, the process we use, the milestones that we have in our sales process, the information that we believe you have to obtain in order to determine the degree of qualification, the messaging and templates that we have for outreach, the pre-call planning worksheet that we have for a discovery meeting. All of that kind of stuff goes in there so that essentially somebody can take that, grab it, study it, refer back to it as they're doing it. And if they know how to sell, they're going to understand how to sell your stuff. Buying triggers, questions to ask, problems that prospects have they might not be aware of, how you elucidate those problems for them with
Did you just say
consultative sales.
elucidate?
I did.
Okay. All right. My hearing's a little screwed up today, but so
So anyway, that's my idea of a playbook.
so this is what's in my mind. Um, like physically, it's like a 3-ring binder or a series of 3-ring binders that walks somebody through all of the things that you mentioned. And you didn't mention them in an order, you just mentioned them, right? Because that wasn't necessarily the order that was in there. And the theory is that you can give that book, that notebook, to a competent salesperson, and they're going to go through it and ask some really good questions of their sales manager and their VPs of sales, and they're going to have this, it's almost like a blueprint for them to follow to be able to navigate the conversations that they need to have with their buyers.
It's absolutely a blueprint. That's a great way to put it. I would say in your Gen X mind, you see 3-ring binders. In a millennial mind, you probably see, a lengthy Google Doc or a
So
PDF or something like that.
if you want to call me names and put labels on me, I'm a boomer, not a Gen X.
All right. Um, but what I was going to say, the real power of it is that it forces the company to stop and figure that stuff out. I mean, how often have they actually figured out the ICP? How often do they understand who their real competitors are? Not the 3 companies that make the same stuff, but the ones that will win based on, a completely different solution that the buyer sees that they never think of. How often do they really do a good, strong win-loss analysis when they lose deals? How do they just have some kind of a casual bant question in their sales pipeline, or do they really have a deal qualification scorecard? So by forcing the issue of the playbook, it means that you have to stop and have those conversations. You have to uncover the buying triggers. You have to uncover the reasons companies actually buy, the problems you solve, the kind of stuff that people just skate over amazingly. And if you skate over that, then you miss the building blocks for effective sales. So creating the process of creating the playbook is as important as having it.
I agree. The getting that process done, and there's multiple processes there, and there's different people involved in making sure your positioning statement for prospecting is congruent with your marketing messaging,
Absolutely.
and that you're talking to the same buyer, and maybe you have multiple buyers
Yep.
in different in industry segments. And there's nothing that you said that I really disagree with, other than it is a great theory that, like, it's like going to college and getting a degree and knowing how all this stuff is supposed to work in business, and then you go out into the world and it's like, oh shit, they don't do it that way that they taught us in B school, right? This is more complicated. It's nuance.
Well, you know what Eisenhower said about planning, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. So but the thing is that, let's just say that because I've walked into an office before and I'm like, well, tell me how you sell something here. And the guy's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, we just go sell. No, you got to have a way to do it. What's the way? And he starts yammering on, and I look up and there's like 3 notebooks, because that guy was old too, up on his wall. They're dusty, and I'm like, what are those? He goes, oh yeah, those are playbooks that we had created. Yeah. And how's it going with those playbooks, right? And I literally took down one, blew off some dust, right? And I'm like, this is how you're supposed to sell, but nobody's following it, right?
So I take two things from that. Number one, and maybe it was just, I don't want to quibble over semantics, but you said that he or she said that we had created. So I think if you just outsource it to somebody and say, "Hey, bring us back something," then that's a big part of what goes on. Secondly, I would say that immediately I would have stopped the conversation and figure out who the sales manager is, and ask the sales manager about their coaching, about their role playing, about how they onboard people, because clearly a sales manager is AWOL in that case.
Yeah, but it's so I'm talking to the VP of sales, so they're just as culpable. So
For
to
sure.
me, the reality is, if that was co-created, collaborated on, elucidated, whatever, right, and it's all there, and the right people put it together, and let's just say it's really good, it still has to be talked about, followed, engaged, coached, accountability too. So, I think all of that is there, and I do pieces of all of that throughout, right? And we document it and we put it into CRMs and whatnot. But I've just never seen a team of people that you can give them the book or the digital copy, and that they go, oh, this is how we do it, yay, and they go. It takes a lot, and to me, it's that commitment around, and I think you were right about our how we define it. Like, we're defining it the same way.
Right.
I'm just picking the fly shit out of the pepper, in that it's all great, but nobody's going to follow it.
Well,
So trying to
an anal-
simplify things.
an analogy that I like to use is football, and I'm not a student of football, but I know enough to know that the teams play Sunday. Monday is film day, where they dissect in great detail everything they did right and wrong and what they didn't understand was going to happen with the opposing team and all that kind of stuff. The way most sales teams work is to have film day and then show up the next Sunday. And what football teams do is then Tuesday, and I'm extrapolating a little bit, but Tuesday they're on the whiteboard, they're drawing the X's and O's, they're fixing the mistakes, and they're planning for the next week. And then Wednesday they're out on the field walking through it. And Thursday, they're running through it. And Friday, they're doing it at full speed and debugging it and working out the kinks and knowing exactly what they need to do. And then Saturday, they're taking a day to just kind of catch their breath. And Sunday, they're doing it again. So if you put the playbook on the shelf, if developing the playbook is like watching film day, and you're never doing the X's and O's, the walk through, the run through, the full speed. I mean, that's all coaching and role playing and accountability. And those, it doesn't work if you don't do those pieces, for sure.
And I that's a great it's a great analogy or metaphor to what it is. But you called them professional football players, right? They're professionals.
Mm-hmm.
And people make the comparisons all the time between athletes and salespeople. Here's the big difference in my mind: those people, the professionals, even the amateurs, who are not arguably amateurs anymore, the ones that play on Saturdays football, they still expect to be coached. That is their expectation. They expect to come in, do the films, do the chalkboard, do the see. That's why I'm a boomer, because I said chalkboard, not whiteboard, right? And you get to the actual running through it, the practice,
Right.
that they expect that coaching as professionals, and most salespeople in the corporate America, that culture doesn't exist. And if that just changed, if we just changed that mindset of that organization and got them to think about getting better at mindset or skill, pick two, I don't care.
All right.
Right?
So you can bang your head against the wall trying to change the mindset, or you can hire people who value being coached.
Takes a minute. If you got 15 guys on your team and you got 5 that are actually doing the work and 10 that are just walking around, you got to replace them. Absolutely. Talent makes everything easier.
Right.
And you got to pay for that. So my point is, and we'll switch here because we got time constraints, but I love the idea of the playbook, especially the way you've defined it. I just don't see people putting in the effort. So I take it in bigger chunks and try to get something done to get growth going and then come back to that, right? But it's that it's to me it's reality because they don't freaking do the work.
Right.
That's just the simple part. So educate me. I don't think we're that far apart on playbooks, and I
I was
think
hoping we'd
people
fight.
your takeaway from this part of the conversation is you need that, and Ed just walked us through why you need to have those components, and it's a big notebook, and it might be more than one. It could be what two or three of those 4-inch notebooks, just like they have for plays in professional sports.
And think of a maturity model. Your first stab at it is going to be kind of rough. And a year and a half
Probably
later, you're going to
something.
understand it better. And then you're going to be kind of at the C level. And then you're working to get to the B and then to the A level. It's a journey.
Yeah, and you got to prep your team for that too, because you want their buy-in and like you're going to help us. Here's the nuts and bolts. This works, but you're going to help us tweak some things here to really tighten it up because you've got boots on the ground. Battle cards. Give me a battle card. What's the scenario there?
So a battle card is typically the responsibility of the product marketing people, but it's sales enablement content. And what it's designed to do is in, say, a front and a back of an 8.5 by 11 letter size piece of paper, or maybe a 4-pager or something, according to a standard format that's used for every competitor to distill down their advantages, their disadvantages, their messaging, their pricing, a variety of information. So your salespeople just intuitively understand very quickly at a glance what they're up against, likely how the other company is selling against them, the kinds of ways that they go to market, all that kind of stuff. Often you'll also incorporate in there a knockout play. So in the world where I live, often selling capital equipment, one of the big challenges we have is trying to displace an incumbent. If somebody's got three or four of another company's machines, we're asking an engineer, a plant manager, those people responsible on the buying team to take a big risk. It's the old IBM thing. Nobody got fired for buying IBM. So if they've got four of another machine and they're okay, they're not great, but they're okay. Um, you ask them to buy a new one, and what if it just is really a bad experience? There's the administrative things like, well, then we have to have two sets of spare parts, and operators have to be trained to bounce between machines. You can work past those, but fundamentally is this psychological risk that people have. So knowing what the knockout play is that lets you enter into that kind of incumbent situation to try to win is an important piece of it. I would argue, and I've never seen anybody do this, but I would argue that you also ought to have battle cards for the other solutions that people would buy. So in my space, like I was recently working with a company doing robotic welders. If you're trying to sell a robotic welder, the company has a couple options. They can hire another welder, they can outsource to a local fab shop, they can go to an integrator and buy a robot that requires programming, or they can go find a cobot that basically requires no programming that they can just move around and set up. Three very different or four very, very different solutions. And we tend to think of just the company that makes the same thing that we make or offers the same service, but the buyer has that range. And so I would argue that we ought to have battle cards for each of those major options across a range too, because if we go back to indecision, then it's easier in that case to go to a local fab shop because okay, you send them parts for 2 months and it works or it doesn't work, but you can work around it. There's no long-term commitment. You don't have the risk of hiring somebody who shows up on drugs and gets hurt. You don't have the risk of buying a machine that doesn't work. So that can be a very attractive option, and we ought to train our salespeople to think about that. So battle card gives them the tools to understand a competitor.
So to me, to both of those are naturals. Um, you're helping them understand how to talk about their competitors and understand their competitors more importantly. I'm assuming there's a component like we don't talk shit about our competitors, right? But we should know they're really good at that thing.
Yeah, and so if you know what they're going to do, if you know their playbook in essence, then you can preempt it because you understand how to adjust your process and the questions you're asking and the things you emphasize.
Yeah. So I think that's great, but I also think that those knockout plays, or just having a battle card, right, for using the term, for how we talk about our play, how we execute it, what components do we need to gather, right? If we can block that all into like a one pager or two pagers, where you actually block all of that out, you're building your sales process in a very illustrative way, right? Where it's easy for people to follow. That most people are visual anyway, right? We're gonna give them that look. That that's see, that's why I like doing this podcast, because I learn stuff along the way, and I've been doing this a long time, and I learn stuff. But so for somebody to have a product manager, that's not the guy that's got a $12 million machine shop, or business. How do they get that done when they don't have that big ass organization that can kick out cool stuff in a couple of weeks?
Well, so normally, if you've got a $300 million company, you've got a couple paid product marketers or product managers, and they're well trained and they understand what they need to be doing, they'll instinctively deliver that kind of stuff. If you've got the 10 or the $50 million company where you've got one or two marketing people, you just have to recognize what their responsibilities are. I mean, they have to do some PR, even though they may not be familiar with it. So they have to research it and maybe find a consultant or somebody to help with part of it. They have to do product marketing. They have to understand pricing. Pricing needs to be set strategically, not just because of the way it's traditionally been done. Those are pricing and battle cards and feature sets and product roadmap are typically product marketing kinds of things. And so you need your one or two person marketing team to be smart enough and creative enough and capable enough of managing their time and working on different things that they spend some time working on that. I mean, there's lots of templates out there. There's 5 or 6 different companies that sell competitive marketing software, and they all offer free battle card templates for free, just as a way to collect leads. So you can find examples and start building them, and then you'll refine them over time.
So if you're a smaller business owner and you're an entrepreneur that doesn't have a big marketing department, you get them to like just start doing the research, and like, this is what I want. I want something like this, and that those competent marketing people can go find the people that can help them create these things, or outsource it to some extent. But they should be understanding what it is that they're creating, and I would imagine there's some collaboration with the right people in a team as well.
Oh, for sure. Your technical salespeople, your field salespeople, management, even the finance team. I'd say the finance team has input in those because, again, in my world, we're talking about capital equipment. And so understanding the way companies make capital equipment decisions requires some finance understanding. So I would plug some of that in. And if the competitor, for instance, offers a try before you buy program, then the CFO or somebody with finance background can explain the implications of that to the business owner that is trying to make a decision between things. So I think it's absolutely it's a cross functional team.
I love it. So, all right, folks, playbooks, battle cards, knockout plays. These are all things that we can walk before we run, right? We can start to build these ourselves. We can start to get people to think about it. And to me, that's the big thing. If we can get people to think differently about how they're doing it, we're getting wins.
Yep.
We're getting them to think a little bit different about what they've done in the past, think outside the box, whatever you want to call it. I just think if we can just get them to think a little different about what their role is, they're going to have greater success. So we if somebody wants to learn more about, they're in the packaging business or in the capital equipment, they want to talk to Ed, they want to learn more, where do we send them?
Easiest thing is go to edmarshconsulting.com. EDMARSH consulting.com. And I'm on LinkedIn. I'm the guy with the American flag after my name.
You're gonna so all that's going to be in the show notes, and you're pretty active on LinkedIn. You want to promote your podcast here?
Sure. The podcast is the Industrial Growth Institute podcast, and the premise of that is to bring people from across that spectrum of revenue growth functions, from board governance and oversight and strategy through all forms of marketing, all aspects of sales, customer success, and the technology that weaves it all together. And I have conversations with them about their particular area of expertise. I try to put it in the context of that, 50, $200 million business owner that hears about all this stuff, knows what they do really well, and wonders what's fact and what's fiction of all this crap they hear floating around.
So you give them a high level overview and having good conversations.
We go high level, but we also go very granular and tactical.
Love it. I've only listened to a couple of those. I'm just being honest. But you get to the point pretty quick, and you get real. I would just say it's a smart conversation.
Thank you.
These people, and you're gonna get some takeaways there. All right, last question, Ed, and I don't care the answer, past or present. Any relationship with cigars?
Yeah, my relationship with cigars is I love smelling them. I miss the fact that when I go to a restaurant, I wish there was some cigarette smoke. I love
Really?
smelling people smoking pipes. I like tobacco smoke. I don't like nightclub where you can't see your way through it, but a little bit in a restaurant, I miss that. So I love the smell of a cigar. I love going to a wedding, once or twice a year and having a cigar. And I think they're beautiful works of art. I mean, when you understand the farmers and the artists that spend years perfecting their craft, it's really neat to understand.
The amount of time, effort, people that touch it, the knowledge behind it, a really quality cigar. I mean, I got a Monte Cristo 1935 anniversary, right? This cigar, I mean, was years in the making,
Right.
right? And then just to wrap it up, right? And the quality that they look for when they stick that band on there, they're not. It hasn't been just thrown in a box. There's been a group of people that have looked at that, and
Right.
treated it with care, and aged and allowed that tobacco to ferment, and then blending it. Holy crap!
Yep.
Amazing. So, yeah, I appreciate that. I don't go as many weddings as I do funerals these days. So, not a lot of cigars at funerals.
Right.
I never thought about that before. All right, Ed, I truly appreciate you taking some time to jump on here. I think there's a lot more of those words and nomenclature that we could tap into, but I
For
think
sure.
there's we hit a couple of them. I learned a little something. I think the audience learned a little something. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I always enjoy our conversations, and it was kind of you to include me in your guest list.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Hi, thanks for taking the time to listen and watch Sales and Cigars. Please don't forget to go hit the subscribe button and tell your friends about this. We've been doing this for a while, and I'm trying to grow the audience. And the goal of this whole podcast is to provide value to you, the listener, the audience, the business owner, the entrepreneur. We want to help out the guests and give them some exposure. And I want to have some fun and learn. And that's what I've been doing for the last few years. So please subscribe, tell your friends. If you've got ideas, please ping me, share those with me. If you're interested in being a guest, reach out. Thanks.